There we go. Okay, so I will turn it over to our wonderful panelists to do some introductions.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you this afternoon. My name is Nicole Lapointe. I am the director of the Institute on Health and Medicine. This summer, the Health and Medicine Immersion, which is our online version. I'm also the executive director of the Northern Vermont Area Health Education Center, or AHEC, which is a very small not-for-profit organization located in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. And our mission is to ensure that there's an adequate number of well-trained health professionals at every level to meet the healthcare needs of Vermonters. My particular passion, and the reason why I love our partnership with Governor's Institute, is in supporting high school youth in transitioning into their post-secondary life, whether that's college or career, whatever that looks like, but helping to plan a pathway forward. It's the best part of my job. So I'm happy to talk about it tonight. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Rory Anderson. I forgot what year I was in. I'm a junior at CVU High School. I am an alumni from 2020 in the Governor's Institute Health and Medicine Immersion. I'm a gymnastics coach and a gymnast, and I love to help outreach and help people find their passions and their interests. And I am extremely fascinated about anything medical. Yeah.
Awesome, and a future pole vaulter as well. So I'm my name is Corey Harwer. I am the director of the Governor's Institute on the Arts, GIA. I went to GIA as a student over 20 years ago and have been involved pretty much every year since. I'm from Middlesex, Vermont originally, but I now live in London, England, where I work with somebody where we're building a company, and it's somebody that I met at GIA. So my GIA roots and their influence on my life go very deep, and I'm super excited to talk about this topic about medicine and dance, because my background prior to building this business is that I was a contemporary dancer for about a dozen years. So so that was what I did before I did the thing that I do now, and I still think of myself as a dancer. And obviously dance and the body and medicine all can tie in really interesting ways. So yeah, obviously delighted to get to see all of you in this digital medium, and really eager to not just be the talking head, but also to hear from all of you in terms of, you know, your thoughts on these things. So thanks Ross and everybody for coming on. So I think we talked a little bit, right, Nicole and Rory in advance, and we may have one more person joining us, Larissa, in a bit. We talked a little bit before this about sort of like, you know, thinking about resiliency in this moment, right? This extended moment where all of us are having to navigate resiliency in some way, shape, or form, or sometimes multiple ways, shapes, and forms. And we thought maybe that would be a good thing to just start with, right? Is just to sort of share a little bit of yeah, maybe, you know, our sort of our thoughts on that and our perspective on yeah, on kind of how do we practice resilience? You know, what does it mean to be resilient right now? And maybe that can be a lead in to starting to talk about these interplays between medicine and dance. Do you want to kick us off, Nicole?
I'd love it. I'd love it.
Awesome.
So resilience is a really important topic in healthcare and has been since even before the pandemic. I've been concerned about the effect of burnout on folks who work in healthcare in terms of how it affects the workforce and the availability of practitioners. Before the pandemic, the National Institutes of Health released a report that showed that upwards of 50% of practitioners, healthcare practitioners, were experiencing some degree of burnout. And then overlay this public health catastrophe that we're living through right now, and the impact of that is really powerful. In these fields, healthcare, mental health, typically when we talk about resiliency, we're talking about the individual's capacity to manage stress, to cope, to withstand adversity. But I'm particularly interested in the role that organizations play, and have been watching closely Governors Institute's role, how my organization has functioned, the roles of other phenomenal institutions in Vermont, how they support individual resiliency, and also how they themselves have demonstrated aspects of being a resilient organization or resilient system. So I don't know, Corey, if you have any thoughts about that in regards to the arts.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, so one of the things that we, last year was sort of the first year that we did GIA online, right? It's been around for 30, 35 years, but always in person, right? And so starting to think about, okay, what does it mean to do it online, and what can we offer that normally, we would offer in person? And one of the things that we thought about was, as an artist, and I think this is exacerbated by the pandemic, but it was present, as you were saying, Nicole, it was present beforehand. As an artist, one of the things that I think you're constantly trying to navigate is how to find sort of sustainability in your life and in your art, right? Figuring out what feeds you about the work that you do. Sometimes you're getting paid for the artist, the artwork that you do. Sometimes you're not, right? Sometimes it's not even about that at all. But one of the things that we found was that as we were talking about it as a group of artists who runs GIA, we were talking about this notion of an artistic practice, right? And the relationship between having an artistic practice and having a resilient sort of base on which you can then produce art, explore, take creative risks, etc. Right? And so for in that context of the arts, I guess one of the things for me that I really think about is just as you say, Nicole, as individuals, we're all having to practice this, and then we're all having to practice this resiliency within groups, within cohorts, whether that's a cohort of our organization or our families or our friends or our communities, right? And so I think one of the things that I'm really interested in, I'm actually interested in from, Brendan, Griffin, Zoe, Michelina, Bob, Mary, Elizabeth, everybody, is the habits or practices that we rely on to find a sustainable way of existing. And I think already that's something that we all would try to navigate prior to the pandemic, and it's just gotten even more pronounced, right, in terms of the stuff that we're navigating now. So I know that stuff has been really resonant with me, both in terms of thinking about my own life and how to find sustainability and build my resilience, as well as for GIA, as well as for the arts. I'm curious, Rory, in terms of for you, because we were just talking about how busy you are, right? Like you coach gymnastics, you also do gymnastics, you also, have jobs and, all these different things. And I'm sure this is the same for a lot of the other young folks on this call. Do you find that you are navigating things in a different way? Have you changed your tack or approach, from now versus a year ago, a year and a half ago? What's that like?
I think especially with the pandemic, there's been a huge impact on, I'd say, the majority of people on their mental health. And I know for me, when my mental health declines, it's a lot more difficult to find the drive to be resilient and to push through and get everything done that I need to. So for me, I'd say the biggest change would be finding things that I could do that would make me happy. So over the pandemic, I took up new hobbies. I started jewelry making and digital art, and I really enjoyed that. Actually, this is kind of unrelated, but I can speak to sort of the opposite of what Nicole was saying. I've just been thinking about this, about resilience as a healthcare provider. I can speak as resilience as a patient. I have grown up with chronic illness, and for years and years, this is not for pity, this is for explaining my situation. I was told that my symptoms were due to anxiety. And freshman year, I missed the majority of my school year because I was unable to eat enough or tolerate the abdominal pain I was having. And my doctor just continued to say that it was just because of anxiety, prescribed me anxiety medication. And then, so I found resilience in having to, one, get through my chronic pain, but also trying to continue to search for a diagnosis when everyone's telling me something's in my head. So I ended up being diagnosed at the beginning of this year with something called gastroparesis, which is the partial paralysis of your stomach. And I think that it's really interesting because patients also have to think about resilience, because doctors are very well trained, but they just don't always know everything. And I think a lot of the time when they have that higher level of burnout, it's harder to really push for what's best for the patient and do the work outside of what the black and white they have to do is. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's a hard road. You know, I think it's important to, as you said, right? So stress and burnout impacts our executive function. It impacts our ability to think creatively and to think outside the patterns. And diagnostic medicine is very, very pattern oriented. It's like, it's looking for the algorithm. It's looking for the set of symptoms that equals this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when anyone in their professional role, and I would think as an artist too, under stress, especially under chronic stress, the ability to think creatively and to expand the models that you use to explain, and even the ability to connect with another person in order to learn from them and expand your own horizons based on the knowledge that they bring, which physicians should be doing with their patients, seeing their patients as colleagues and experts in their own health, that all of that gets impacted.
It's interesting, Nicole, because one of the things that, you know, having the privilege of working with young people and still slightly, you know, remembering what it felt like to be a young person, I think there's this, maybe universal is too strong, but like this quite common experience of being like not listened to, basically, like as a young person, you know what I mean? Or like people kind of like telling you what to do, or telling you what you should think, or telling you where you should go or whatever, and really like not having, and maybe this is my experience or whatever, but like not having enough spaces where you are affirmed in just the way of like, I'm listening to you. You know what I mean? Like, tell me what your truth is. And if your truth changes today to tomorrow, I'm still gonna listen, right? And that thing of, I feel like, you know, what I hear you saying, Rory, it's a sort of similar thing, right? It's like your truth that you're telling was not being heard, whether or not it was because they didn't want to listen, or because it was confusing, or it fell outside of the mold or whatever. But I feel like that experience, that was like a medical, you know, a medically specific experience of actually something I think a lot of, I mean, people in general, but certainly young folks encounter quite often, of like, you're not hearing me. You're not hearing what I'm saying here.
Sorry to interrupt. I think that a lot about that too is because of the, like, as Nicole was saying, it is pattern oriented. So a lot of the time, I'm still speaking very medically, but a lot of the time mental health directly does impact physical health. I know people who had severe mental health disorders that actually ended up developing chronic disorders and diseases because they couldn't find the care they needed as a result of the mental health, if that makes sense. So I'm not blaming the providers at all, because I think a lot of the time physical symptoms and attributes are due to mental health. I think that a larger part of it sometimes is just finding resilience to keep going and to find people who will listen to your truth as you put it. And that I think that there's also an issue with, I agree that there's an issue with listening to younger people, especially as I can definitely speak to that as a female identifying person, and in society, I know in general that females tend to be less listened to and more like dramatic.
Go ahead.
No, Corey, if you were going to respond to Rory, I was going to actually say something different on a different line. Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. You know, one of the things that I really appreciated about Governor's Institute of Vermont last year, when we were having to make the shift, and it felt like a crisis, because I don't know about you, Corey, but we had our whole program set up and everything planned, and we had to scrap the whole thing and start over. And I didn't know how to build an online program. I'd never done that before. And the directive that we received is from the Governor's Institute's headquarters was just focus on creating space for connection and engagement. Just focus on giving young people a place where they can connect with one another of shared interest and support their exploration to whatever degree they want. And that, I mean, I think that was an incredibly resilient posture to take, and really became the focus of the way we developed our institute. And Rory, maybe, I don't know if you wanted to share your experience about this, but foregrounding and emphasizing spaces online, systems on, methods online, where youth could connect in meaningful ways and connect with their medical student mentors in meaningful ways, really became a catalyst for a very, very deep learning experience. Way more was learned and covered than we expected. And I think it's an example of how when we are forced to push past our boundaries, we actually end up discovering things that are tremendously applicable. So in some ways, for me, that was my COVID silver lining, was realizing that we are capable of making connection to each other online, and that it's the focus of that connection that actually creates engagement and stimulates learning and catalyzes a learning community. And that was really exciting for me.
What I appreciated, so when I had applied to the Governor's Institute, it was early March last year, when we had still been planning to be in person. I had heard about this program and applied probably like a week or two before the deadline. I found out about it very last moment. And then I know that once COVID struck, I have been thinking about all of the stuff I do, and I was like, what's going to happen? And what I really appreciated was the aspect of the Governor's Institute that said we can and we will make it happen still. And that really impacted myself positively, because once I heard it was going online, I was like, oh, do I still really want to do this? Do I want to spend a week and a half online? And I ended up having so many laughs, learning so much. It was really, really fun to speak with all of these college med students, and I made a couple really good friends who I still talk to. I actually got to meet them once COVID calmed down a little bit, which was super special. And we have a lot in common. And I was not expecting that at all, because I'm very socially oriented. So I actually was hoping to go to Governor's Institute and meet a lot of new people. And I was not sure how that would go once we went online. And even, I just think that the necessity to push yourself into uncomfortable boundaries and sort of take healthy risks, like putting yourself out there online, can be really awkward and difficult, especially with technical difficulties, which honestly end up being kind of funny sometimes. So just pushing yourself to participate in things like the health and medicine immersion, we did game nights. We had we had a talent show one night. And at first I was really nervous to participate in those things. And then it ended up being an awesome experience. It was super fun and everyone was there to support each other.
So we actually have a question about that in the chat from Elizabeth. She asks, what differences did you notice in the online versus in-person ways of connecting that you might carry forward afterwards? And Elizabeth, I don't know if you wanted to say any more on that, but.
Corey might have some things to share about this too, but I think the thing that is most significant for me is we had always thought about the Institute as a finite thing, that we come together, we build community, we go through this period, and then our community dissipates. And we hope that we stay in touch with one another, that we maintain those networks. But what I understand now is that connecting online gives us the opportunity to extend that experience, to convene as a group together before we come together in person, so that when we get together in person, we already have the seeds of those relationships started, and the community building will just accelerate. And then when we get to the end, which is always kind of bittersweet, there are systems in place where we can all still continue to connect. So the students learn a tremendous amount from each other. They connect to their medical student mentors, many of whom want to stay in touch with them. And the applications and the platforms that we used can really facilitate that ongoing peer network and mentorship network into the future in very concrete ways.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's funny. One of the things that it makes me think about is, so as a dancer, in my earlier in my life, one of the things about being a dancer for me was that I was quite itinerant. So I was living in different cities and different countries and that kind of thing. And what it meant was that I needed to find a set of habits and practices that allowed me to stay connected to my various communities, right? Who might exist in, might have a community in Vermont and then another one in New York and another one in, whatever other places, right? And so the navigation of that distance became an aspect of my sort of existing in the world, right? How was I going to maintain that clear sense of community, even though I wasn't proximal to the folks who I was used to being with? And I can remember the feeling at GIA as a student, and going in person and having this like incredible connection with people, and just feeling so synced up with them, and then going back to my community, right, and going back home, and it made me, I don't know, I sort of, it inculcated in me this desire to stay connected to those who weren't proximally, near. And so I think that then led into my, post school and college life, dancing and traveling around. And I think what I hope that this moment offers, and what an online version of these normally in-person institutes offers, is a demonstration that community doesn't necessarily have to be mediated by being in person. Yes, it's wonderful, and it's, it is not a substitute for in-person connection to have a digitally mediated connection, but it doesn't mean it's an insignificant connection, right? And I think that piece came across clearly for us in the Institute last year, was that we could still have a meaningful connection. We could still make a significant bond with people that we would then want to build on with an in-person meeting, hopefully at some point, but that it wasn't just, because it was digital, it wasn't just that it was like throwaway or something like that. It was actually just, it was another way to sustain that connection until you meet in person, and then to sustain it when you're not in person.
A comment just popped up on my phone. I have these notifications from a motivational app, and the quote was, "If it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you." And I just thought that really relates to what we're talking about. And thinking about some of the friends that I made through the Institute, one of the things that was significant to me was that it was definitely more awkward to get to know people via Zoom. You're not in person. You don't have a lot of things that you can sort of deflect and distract. Like you can't just talk about the weather when you're talking about on Zoom in different parts of the country. I mean, different parts of the state. And it's just ended up reminding me that also what we grew up learning about how everyone we would meet online is like a sketchy criminal and we should never meet them in person. I ended up learning that I can actually meet some really good friends online, and that if you're being safe and cautious, then it's not always a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too that engaging with presenters, guest presenters and experts online made me realize, and it was sort of a, sun breaks over Marblehead. I don't know why I never thought about it before, but we can engage with health practitioners from all over the world. Like there's no limit in terms of, who's close enough that they can drive to see us, on their off day or after their office hours. So that really opened up a huge field of possibility too, in being able to connect students with specialists in fields and in occupations that resonate with students' interests.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because one of the things that it also made, so one of the things that normally happens at GIA is, we have this evening artist series, right? And it pulls in artists from different disciplines, right? And you might have a visual artist one night and a performing artist another night and a singer another night, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I think it also references for me that thing of having access to really anyone, right? Like as you're saying, Nicole, it's not, you're no longer geographically bound, and therefore, the pool of folks who could join you, who could engage you is different. And I think that the thing that it also sparked for me a bit was, how broad can we think about an artist or an artistic approach? Like how broad can that approach be, right? And actually one of the things that it started to get me thinking about was having conversations that were more interdisciplinary, even outside of just two different arts, but actually, like speaking to a doctor, like, there's this woman, Rupa, of Rupa and the April Fishes, who is an emergency room doctor, and she's the front person singer for a band, and has like this, musical career, and then has this, the emergency medicine career. And it feels like folks who are exploring that, sometimes it's really hard to get them to come in person to, Southern Vermont, but being able to have access to them was this brand new thing.
I just want to call attention to the chat really quick. I know we're all kind of seeing it as it comes, but Zoe was saying that in some ways she's noticed that online feels more personal despite the physical barrier, because we all see each other's homes and pets, and it feels like people are more okay with being casual, which I hugely agree with for sure. I mean, that's part of how this came about, is the idea that, like, at this point we may as well all be friends, right? Let's just sit down and have a conversation. It doesn't have to feel like a meeting, that sort of thing. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Corey, Nicole, Rory.
Yeah, I'd like to comment about the huge disparities in internet connectivity and bandwidth access across Vermont. It's really, really distressing. And I think that one of the things that we saw that was incredibly hopeful is that in their small groups, the students actually problem solved amongst themselves about how to ensure that everybody was included on a Zoom. If somebody was having bandwidth issues and couldn't have their camera on, which is difficult because, you might forget that they're in the room, and making sure that that person's voice and their presence was still heard in the group, the small groups on their own. It was largely student driven, developed systems to make sure that everybody was present and accounted for, considered and heard over the course of the meeting. We also utilized other platforms other than Zoom. So we had asynchronous discussions where students were on a chat, which they could do on their mobile device. Yeah, but I think, I mean, I would really love to see internet be a public utility. I think it's critical. It's even more important now really than electricity, because there are a lot of people who live off the grid and can get access to electricity, but if you live off the grid, it's harder. I guess you can through mobile and cell, but it's expensive and it's hard to get access in very rural communities.
I was actually in the immersion. My family made the choice to go up to the Adirondacks because my grandmother has a place up there, and it is in a very rural town in the middle of nowhere on the lake. So it was beautiful and it was amazing to be able to spend my time there, but I definitely had a lot of internet issues at the time. And thankfully, all of our groups were very accommodating. Like if my camera wasn't working or if audio was cutting out, then someone would type it to me to fill me in. We also did utilize the asynchronous tool, which was Slack, this app a lot that you could chat on. In my group, utilized that a lot so we could all message to each other and communicate without having to have all of our cameras loading at the same pace. Sometimes we chose to do extra calls when we would do the patient case studies, but it was never like, I think everyone was really good at trying to make sure each other were included. And to comment on the possible computer, like not having a good computer to use, thankfully the Institute, I didn't have an issue with this, but I know some people did. The Institute offered tablets for loan that we could have participated on in order to have more equality and have everyone be able to use strong enough technology that they would be able to participate on all the platforms.
Yeah, we had both some students who use some hardware from HQ, as well as folks who were navigating internet issues such that they were working out of the parking lot, as Rory is demonstrating so notably. So they were working out of the local library parking lot or something like that, right? And again, it does feel like this is one of those elements where high time for Vermont to solve this one. Definitely to maintain relevance in the modern world, right? Is it just dial-up doesn't cut it anymore. So yeah, that we did try to navigate it a bit by having as much asynchronous opportunity as well. And we use Slack also, to great effect. That was really helpful. We tried to also make sure that, if someone was having issues, that, an RA could speak with them after class or once they did get online and that kind of thing. So, but as you say, Nicole and Rory, I think it is just about I work in our business is a global business. And so, we have people all over the world. And even with that, we still have folks who, their internet goes down or there's some sort of bandwidth issue. And again, it's navigating that is a skill in the workplace, just like it is, for folks in an immersion as well. So it felt relevant. I'm curious about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ross.
No, by all means.
I was just gonna say that, just because I'm cognizant of time and I'm curious, one of the things that I think maybe in the title of this talk, possibly, talking about the marriage of medicine and dance, or the relationship maybe between medicine and dance. And I'm just cognizant that while I'm totally interested in all the stuff that we've been talking about as well, I'm curious about some of the, we started to have a bit of a conversation last week, Nicole and Rory, just in terms of thinking about some of the relationships between those two fields, those two disciplines. And I think one of the things that GIV does do really well is offer a very broad palette of programming, right? So you can, and even and with these immersions and other times you can even do multiple institutes, right? So you could probably go to the Health and Medicine Institute and then go to the Arts Institute and take dance, or whatever it is. And I guess one of the things I'm curious about for you, Nicole, and also Rory, for your experience at the Institute is what your relationship, because medicine is so specific and so broad at the same time, right? It's dealing with a specific set of issues, but also it's something that all of us can relate to because we all have bodies and we all have ways in which health affects us. I'm curious about, like, in those conversations that you all have, how much do you have to navigate just speaking medically, just speaking specifically about that versus talking about sort of a broader interdisciplinary tie-in? Because that's something we navigate with the arts a lot as well, is how much to go specifically into a discipline versus all the ways in which people tie it in. I just would be curious what that's like at the Medicine Institute.
Yeah, if I may. Oh, sorry, Nicole. I know that my small group, most of our conversation was focused on the lifestyle. So the scope for our conversation, sorry, I'm laughing at Ross's comment, would start large, and we would be talking about the lifestyle of this person, their family history, their hobbies, and you want to like get to know them, right? And then you're looking smaller scale, so you're kind of zooming in on certain problems, which a lot of the time sort of relate back to the larger scale habits, like such as athletes or a gymnast like I am might have a lot of wrist pain, and the wrist pain is probably because of constant impact on the wrists. So if we would get to know sort of the situation in the person before more specifically going into the direct health, like saying, well, they have a fracture in their wrist or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great example of just the interdisciplinary nature of healthcare. And from my position, I'm not a healthcare provider. My background is actually in community organizing and social work. So public health is really my sort of my ground that I come out of. And so I think about, when we're talking about specific issues in medicine, we might be talking about how to clinically diagnose or treat, how to engage with an individual patient. There's also a social context around that issue, whether it's about the prevalence of the issue in certain populations, or the availability of care, or how the system, how the biomedical culture views certain conditions and practices. So that is that's a lens that I'm particularly interested in, and I think the medical students do a good job of introducing those concepts, because they're all engaged in their first year. They're all they just finished their first year of medical school, and during their first year they've all been engaged in a course called Professionalism, Reflection, and Communication, where they think about these issues and the ethics around the interconnection of the personal with the social.
Yeah, I think that's really resonant for me as well, Nicole, just in that sense that it's very difficult, or perhaps it's not difficult enough. It can be problematic to look at things too singularly, right? To try to sort of just focus on one thing and not be able to therefore lose the forest. And individually, that can be really important. I know that, like, as a person, right, you can sort of have somebody focus on just your job title, or focus on just one thing they know about you, and that is certainly not appropriately representing your entire person. And one of the things that we definitely think about a lot at the arts program, right, is this thing of how do we contextualize art making and artistic engagement in a way that isn't just art for art's sake, which art for art's sake is great. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But that, you know, what is it to be engaged as an artist in your world? There's a Vermont legislator whose name I think is Randall Scott, or probably pronouncing his last name wrong, but who talks about civic artisanship. And you know, what is it to engage artistically with one's world, both with expertise and, you know, integrity, that is not just about how high can you kick your leg, how many octaves can you sing, and how good are you with this tiny paintbrush, but also what is it to engage artistically with one's world, and that thing of trying to continue to contextualize, as you say, Rory, from the biggest picture down to the smallest, and then to telescope in between those two ends up being super important.
I have a question for Corey. I am curious about, you know, we talked a little bit last week about how some of the work that we do suffers when we can't be proximal to each other. And I wondered how the Arts Institute navigated some of that, you know, work that's typically done in ensemble.
Totally. Well, you know, I had a similar reaction to you when it was like, okay, we're gonna go, you know, we're gonna go online, and sort of being like, bleh. And then, you know, what we tried to explore was, okay, where are the places where we just can't, you know, we literally can't do the thing that we used to do. But then what that prompted was us to think about, okay, well, what was at the heart of what that thing was, right? You know, and so in terms of collaboration, interestingly, you know, one of the classes that was taught last year was a collaborative theater class. And so it was all about sort of saying like, okay, Zoom is the mediating, you know, technology that we are using right now. How are we going to leverage it to create a collaborative theater piece? Right. And you know, what's the way that we're going to figure that out? And so that ended up being something that was kind of a catalyst for creativity, really. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, well, so this is the frame. You know, normally you have the proscenium maybe in a typical theater environment, right? You've got, you know, stage left, stage right, there's downstage, there's upstage, etc. Here you go, you know, right now, so, you know, I need to enter stage left, you know, or like whatever it is, right? And I think it's something that it is another artistic challenge to explore in terms of how you cue each other, how you have signals in that way. There are technological challenges, you know, Zoom drum circle, there you go, you know, like there are places, right, where you I think have to try to identify what the core thing is about the collaboration and what the limits or opportunities are of the mediating technology, and find how you gap that, right? And you can't always do it, but I think actually with some creativity, you can do it a lot more than you would think. Or that was what we found anyways. I'm curious for you actually, Nicole, in terms of, because I know one of the big things that you all do is like being very hands-on, you know, like it's you I mean you're you know, injecting oranges, you're doing, you know, you're doing all these kinds of things, right? Like how did you all navigate that that thing of, you know, not having that tangible connection to a central thing? Did you send everybody all the same thing, or what was that to sort of reckon with that tangibility, which is so present in, I think, what you all offer and how you all, you know, engage your you know, your students?
Yeah, we're getting better at that with time. Last summer, we actually only did a handful of hands-on things. One of them was, you know, working with a stethoscope, measuring vital signs. We did remotely. in 2020, we utilized a platform called Autopsy Online, where the students had access to real video footage of human autopsies, that consented human autopsies that were annotated. And so in that way, the hands-on component was the students being able to, both in small groups, but also independently, be able to explore organ systems and pathology and different elements that were illustrated in that platform. But I think we've gotten better at it in the interim. And there are a number of resources now, you know, because everybody in the education world is learning how to navigate remote learning. So there are lots and lots of lab kits that come prepackaged. And so for this year, what we're working with we're working with college faculty, and each faculty member is doing a session that includes a hands-on lab component. So I'm very excited about that. And as well as having options that students can choose. And so they'll get special stuff in their care package that they get sent that's for the session that they've selected. So I think we're getting better at that than we were last summer. It was kind of a scramble to get all the stuff into the boxes and get the boxes to the post office. It was a little bit of a circus, actually.
Zoe in the chat asks, do you think you will have any art medicine intersection projects? Which I think leads us nicely into, I know we're getting close to 5 o'clock, so I'd love to open it up for like some of that Q&A. But yes, the microphone is on and pointed in your direction. Will there be art medicine hybrid?
Definitely. We're going to do a massive project. No, possibly, right? Like I think the interesting thing to me, and again, this is, I mean, it was just, you know, a shameless plug, but like, especially with it being pay what you can this summer, like I just would encourage young folks to take as many of these as they are interested in, right? You know, like just get exposure to them, you know what I mean? And I think that each institute probably will focus specifically, you know, in its particular disciplines, right? But that, as I think you said, Rory, you know, everybody is you're trying to look from that large lens and then go to that smaller lens, right, and zero in. And I think that's something that I know that if at the Arts Institute somebody was like, I want to do this project and it's all about, you know, this thing that I've been encountering or that's happened in my community or it's in response to COVID or whatever, or even say, yeah, totally, exactly. So whether on that way or on the other way, I definitely think that at least at the Arts Institute, I'm sure anything would go. I can't speak for Nicole, but.
Oh, I know. Sorry, I'm not Nicole. Last year we actually did sort of an artistic finale project. Finale is not the right word. Getting too swept into the art aspect. We did, I don't remember what we called it. I think it's called a bulletin board project, and it was a virtual bulletin board. And each group worked together to come up with, or each small group worked together to come up with their own way to visualize the learning that they had accomplished over the last week and a half. So a lot of groups actually did do things like, is that what you're pulling up? Oh, sorry. A lot of groups did do things like a visual organ system demonstration where they would draw out the whole thing. Or my group, we all put together a list of the words that we had all learned throughout the immersion, and then I visually put all of the words together in visual art. So I think there is a little bit of intersection just in the way that you think about every project.
I knew I had to pull that up as soon as the discussion topic was reached, because I fondly remember that. If anyone has any questions, I think at the risk of some chaos, but who doesn't value that a little bit in this day and age? I think anyone can unmute and ask a question if they've got one. I know we're coming up on 5 o'clock, but.
So I guess I would have a question of any of the folks who haven't spoken. And I know, Rory, you've got a hard stop in about 3 minutes. So if we lose you, thank you so much. It's so great to get to chat with you about all this. I'd be curious with the folks who haven't spoken. Yeah, I would be curious about you know, as you think about an immersion and, you know, a summer program, which normally is, you know, in person, but is digital once more this year, like what the elements are that are most intriguing or most interesting or most exciting or most curious to you. I just be curious about that, whether on the medicine side or on the art side. No right or wrong answer, obviously, just curious, like individually for folks.
I think I have personally never done any kind of summer project or program like these that you've been talking about and stuff like that. But I think honestly just the like the idea of just the learning new things kind of thing appeals to me a lot, even if it's not strictly able to be hands-on with something or have a good what's the word? One of you guys said it before, like not discussion, but like being able to connect with people regardless of that. I think just the learning aspect is personally what I would be most interested in. I like to see new things.
Totally. That's awesome, Brandon. I think in any of the programs you will get more than your fair share of new things. I would imagine. That's part of the thing. Actually, I imagine similar for you, Nicole. But we were learning a ton as well. Thanks, Rory. We were learning a ton as well in doing it. So, like, you know, I think there's an element of sort of learning as a group. What else? Anybody else? Stuff that you know intrigues you, or you know that you're curious about, or that you'd be looking for? Or
I volunteer with Dream, which is like a youth mentoring thing, and I know that at the start of the pandemic everything was very like up in the air, whereas before it had been very consistent, and I think that consistency is really like important to hammer down, like as if, you know, we treat things as if we're just doing, you know, as if it's always, that's always how it's been. Like having a consistent date is, I think, really important.
I appreciate that, Griffin. I just want to speak to that. So when we were doing the online institute, I still felt like I was at camp. Like I wore flip-flops to my desk every day. I got up, I was like ready to go. We had staff huddle at the beginning of every day, did the rah-rah, and you know, to the extent possible, high-fived everybody on their way into the Zoom. And it really felt as much as we could possibly make it. I felt like we were at the Institute, that we were there together. So that consistency that we have when we're together on a college campus and the schedule is this way and we're the same when we're eating breakfast together, and we reflect together at the end of the day and we play games together at the end of the evening. We tried to do that, to make that, to give it the same feel. It worked for me.
Okay, we are at our time, so I'm hesitant to cut anything off. If anyone still has any questions or anything like that, I'll be happy to stay on for a bit if anyone has specific questions or that sort of thing. But thank you all so much for joining us. This has been a lovely hour of getting people's perspectives, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your Sunday to join us for that. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Griffin. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Michelina.
Yeah, thank you.
I will stop the
Bye, y'all.
recording here, I think.